Good morning. I'm Elaine Chapnick, President of the Larchmont Mamaroneck Local Summit, welcoming you to our October meeting via Zoom. I want to thank LMC TV, our co-host, for their work in making all this possible. In addition to health effects, the current pandemic has also caused increased tensions in many households as jobs have been lost, incomes reduced, and children underfoot doing remote learning as parents are trying to concentrate on doing their own work online. The result has been an increase in domestic abuse. Today's program will help us understand more about this and what resources are available to help families in our community. At the end of the program, we're going to have an opportunity to have questions. They'll be answered in the order by which they're received by Ann Bitkowski. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little icon that enables you to click on it to raise your hand, and that's how she'll know. And now I'll turn the program over to today's program chair, Larry Thal, who will introduce the panel. Larry.
Thank you, Elaine. I just have a quick note, because this topic and other serious issues which we visit is just the reason I wanted to participate on the local summit. We explore, learn from the experts, and take action, enlightening our decision-making, and thus help to make our community better. Thanks go to our entire committee, Ann Bitkowski, John Bradley, and John Gitlitz, as well as to the many board members who helped coordinate and make the event possible. Of course, we thank LMC TV and LMC Media Productions, which I'm sure Elaine will do later, but I'll now read the panelist bios in the order of their presentations. First will be Susan Carroll, the Director of Training, Outreach, and Education at the Pace Women's Justice Center. Susan Carroll has worked at PWJC since 2007 and has been Director of Training, Outreach, and Education since 2015. Through outreach and training programs, Carroll raises awareness, shares information, and trains judges, police officers, attorneys, social service providers, law students, and the community on domestic violence, sexual assault, including issues involving campus sexual assault, and elder abuse issues, reaching over 12,000 individuals across Westchester and New York State each year. Ms. Carroll is a certified police trainer and regularly trains at the Westchester County Police Academy, developing training materials, curriculum, and collaborative presentations to Westchester police agencies, as well as across New York State, pursuant to a statewide rural sexual assault and training violence program. Ms. Carroll also supervises the center's Elder Justice Training Program. She is the project coordinator of an Abuse in Later Life grant, which created training, enhanced services, and a collaborative community response to elder abuse. Ms. Carroll is the training coordinator and attorney liaison for sexual assault victims and domestic violence victims in a grant involving several colleges in Westchester County. During her tenure at the center, Ms. Carroll also has presented petitioners in family court in Yonkers and White Plains and the family court legal program, supervised volunteers in the center's free legal helpline, and helped represent domestic violence clients in the center's family justice unit. Before joining the Pace Women's Justice Center, Ms. Carroll worked with the Bronx District Attorney's Office for 10 years, handling a mix of felonies, including homicides, assaults, sexual assault cases, and other cases, including domestic violence-related offenses. Ms. Carroll is a graduate of Boston College and Boston College Law School. Moving to our second panelist, Quentin Walcott, Co-Executive Director of Connect NYC. He's known as Q, and he's a leading national and international anti-violence activist, educator, and writer. A hallmark of his work over the last 22 years has been engaging men and boys as allies and activists in the movement to prevent intimate and gender-based violence. The foundation of Quentin's work is a focus on the intersections of violence, race, class, and gender, and its impact on marginalized communities. As co-directors of Connect, Quentin and Reverend Dr. Sally McNichol were jointly named New York New Abolitionists in 2014. Prior to taking the helm of Connect in 2013, he helped develop the Connect Training Institute, the leading anti-violence learning facility in New York City, and was director of Connect's Community Empowerment Program. Quentin is one of the U.S. leaders selected by the Novo Foundation to participate in its groundbreaking Move to End Violence initiative, a 10-year program to strengthen the movement to end gender-based violence in the United States. He's also a member of the Resonance Network's Governance Committee. In 2018, Quentin was selected to serve on the New York City Domestic Violence Task Force Steering Committee and was appointed to the New York City Mental Health Advisory Group. He is co-founder and chief organizer of the Father's Day Pledge Against Violence, an annual event established in 2010, which is observed in 50+ U.S. cities. Quentin was a speaker at the first White House United States of Women Summit 2016 on gender equality and shared the dais with TV actor and activist Matt McGorry. Quentin was awarded the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women Award in 2014. He was the first man to receive the now New York City Susan B. Anthony Award in 2012. After graduating college, he was mentored by Dr. John Aponte, the foremost leader in the batterers intervention in New York City, and began his life work in 1996 facilitating batterers intervention programs and various other groups for men and youth throughout the 5 boroughs. For 6 years, he co-chaired the New York City Coalition on Working with Abusive Partners, which is comprised of representatives of organizations concerned with preventing and ending abusive behavior and abusive intimate relationships. Quentin has partnered with Cornell University ILR School to create Men and Women as Allies, an in-depth training for corporations and labor unions to respond to and prevent domestic violence in the workplace and bullying behavior. Quentin was invited to be a member of the SEIU's External Advisory Committee to review and enhance the union's policies on sexual harassment. And he has partnered with VDAY, he has participated in international anti-violence forums and led trainings in Brazil, Canada, Fiji, France, India, Kenya, St. Martin, South Africa, Switzerland, and Thailand. Our third panelist is Lieutenant Sandra DeRuza of the Village of Mamaroneck Police Department. She started her career there in 2004. In the fall of 2007, then Officer DeRuza was responsible for the creation of the Domestic Violence Unit within the department. Officer DeRuza was promoted to the rank of detective in June of 2009, where she served as the domestic violence and youth detective for 7 years. In her role as detective, she assisted with youth investigations and domestic incident-related investigations and provided resources and support to victims. For the last 10 years, Lieutenant DeRuza has also been assisting the Westchester County Police Academy with domestic violence instruction of new recruits. In her role as patrol lieutenant, she oversees operations within the patrol division, including cases of domestic violence. She also works closely with Detective Frank Maresca and Detective Chris Yeager, the current youth domestic violence detectives for the department. Our fourth and final panelist, last but not least, is Edith Ramos. She's a bilingual victim advocate at Westchester Community Opportunity Program, known as WestCOP Victim Assistance Services. She has a bachelor's degree in social work. Over the last several years, she has been providing trauma-informed counseling and advocacy for survivors of domestic violence, sex, and labor trafficking. Victims Assistance Services, that's VAS, provides free, comprehensive, and compassionate services to crime victims and their families, friends, and loved ones. VAS also works to end violence through community action, public policy, and culture change, as well as through prevention education programs in schools and in other community venues. I'll turn it back to you now. Let's start the program. So we're going to start off with Susan. You'll be our first presenter.
Okay, thanks. Hi, good morning, everyone. I want to say thank you for including me and Pace Women's Justice Center in this programming and shining a spotlight on intimate partner violence this month. I really appreciate the focus. I want to give you a brief thumbnail sketch of what intimate partner violence is. I know that unfortunately, since it affects so many men and women, that for the participants in this talk this morning, you can probably tell me what it is. You might have a friend or family member who has experienced it. And we know statistically it begins very young, that it can start in middle school and in dating relationships. But it's a pattern of coercive behavior in which one intimate partner attempts to control another through threats or actual use of tactics. And it may include different factors. I know when people think of domestic violence, they often used to just think of physical violence. You know, it wouldn't be DV if you didn't see a black eye or marks on the arm. And we've come a long way in how we handle intimate partner violence, because decades ago, and I know Lieutenant DeRuza could probably tell me better in terms of historically, the thought was it was a family matter, and that if officers did respond, and I'm talking in the 60s, 70s, even unfortunately early 80s, the idea was if you call the police and it involved a matter with your loved one or a husband or partner, that you just needed to cool off, and that it wouldn't be investigated as a crime necessarily, and that you would just ask these parties to separate. But we know that's not a solution. So in addition to the physical violence, there is sexual violence that is often a component of domestic violence relationships, verbal abuse, emotional and physical abuse, and financial abuse. I want to highlight financial abuse because I think for many of the participants of this talk, you might be living and working in Westchester, right? It's the Larchmont Mamaroneck Task Force. And I think there's often a perception, as there has been, that domestic violence is one of those crimes that happens somewhere else. It may happen in urban areas. It may happen in areas where people have perhaps, in our perceptions, different socioeconomic class or perhaps different financial concerns. But that's not the case. And if we think back to cases that have been in the news, sadly, we know that domestic violence is everywhere. And it can be in our most affluent communities, not just our more urban areas. And the financial abuse piece, up to 99% of domestic violence partners experience financial abuse. It can be withholding of funds. It can be limiting access to services. It can be coerced debt, making a partner take out a second mortgage now that you've lost your job, or taking on credit card debt, or assuming debts of someone else. And as a way to both limit and control that person to stay in the relationship. Other additional behaviors including using children. You know, right now we're seeing in the pandemic, a lot of people, even in newly separated couples, have issues with custody arrangements. And they're using this time to say, continue the control or abuse, saying, you know, I'm not going to allow you to continue to see the child because I don't like your new boyfriend and perhaps he isn't engaging in safe behaviors, or other pretextual things. Immigration status is a concern. If it's a couple that's in an LGBTQ community relationship, it might be threatening to out them, or in some way let other people they haven't disclosed their status to as a way to control them. And it certainly happens in disabled populations as well. What do we know it's not? We know it's not a jealousy issue. We know it's not an anger management problem alone, or caused by alcohol or drug abuse, or that it's solely because economic times are hard and he or she lost his job and therefore that's an excuse for this, or that it's connected to mental illness. The big distinction with intimate partner crimes is people, and again, the lieutenant can tell us better, are reluctant to involve law enforcement or other agencies. Because, you know, if I walk outside and my car is broken into, I'm all too happy to call my local police department and file a report and have them look into it. But if it's my partner and someone who's helping support me while I work and perhaps raise children together or help pay bills together, and there is a sense that there is love in that relationship, I'm not likely to want to call the police, you know, and that's true in elder abuse crimes as well, unfortunately. What we need to do as a society, and what I hope we start doing, is instead of asking why aren't these people leaving, is to say, what barriers do we as a society put up that prevent them from leaving? What are we imposing upon them? Is it a lack of a support system, a lack of good immediate shelter, a lack of support if these individuals perhaps are undocumented or worried about their immigration status and then feel threatened and that they have to stay in this abusive relationship? Are we putting up other barriers because we're not providing resources if they want to leave and they have children in a local school system, pets, you know, things that they can't walk out the door without? What message are we sending in terms of shame or self-blame? And how can we make counseling and mental health services more readily available and free and accessible for everyone? I want to give you a couple of stats quickly about this. In 2018, there were approximately 11,157 domestic incidents reports filed in Westchester County. Now, those don't all involve intimate partner. I know the lieutenant can tell us as well. Some of those involve family members. But what those are the tip of the iceberg, because we know intimate partner victims do not call the police. We also know that in 2018, there were 1,095 females in intimate partner relationships who reported to police domestic violence crimes and 201 males. And that the cost to the US economy, to all of us, was $8.3 billion annually in a Department of Defense study in 2015. So this is a matter, whether we realize it or not, that affects all of us, that having these unhealthy relationships, and again, it's 1 in 4 that in terms of men and women that we assume are affected over their lifetime that may be in an abusive relationship at some point. And I know some of our other speakers will talk about how they're trying to break the cycle and help inform and re-educate people to patterns and styles, but this impacts us all, whether we realize it or not. In terms of what help is available now, this is a crazy time we're living in, but help is all still there. As we're still communicating with Zoom, legal help and assistance is also available. The place where I work is called the Pace Women's Justice Center. We represent victims of intimate partner violence and everyone, not just women, in Westchester and Putnam counties. And our services are free. They are bilingual. We operate 2 walk-in centers, family court legal programs, right now in the courthouses in White Plains and in Yonkers. You can still walk in there now. Generally, because the way it's been working, most of the judges still hear cases remotely. So what happens is you'll walk in and you'll be put in a room with a camera and you'll speak to attorneys and or the courts in that manner. But you can also access that help remotely, much like we're having this conversation remotely. That number is 422-4035. These are 914 area code numbers. These services are free, they're confidential. They're available to you if you live in a $10 million home or you don't have a penny in your pocket. You have the ability to speak to a lawyer confidentially, bilingually, and find out what an order of protection in family court might look like, how you could get a custody or support order, because we know in intimate partner violence, if you're seeking court assistance and you have children, the answer isn't just one piece of paper, because then what do you do about support and income? What do you do about your children and sharing homeschooling and duties and childcare? We also have a walk-in legal clinic, which again, right now is remote, but it's all still been there. Ever since the world shut down mid-March, every day we're still representing people, and they're calling us by phone or also through web platforms like this, 422-4188. In that program, you have a 1-hour consultation with an attorney. You can share documents via Zoom. You can get help on a bunch of matters, including housing, how it affects immigration concerns, custody support, divorce. We have a legal helpline, intake 914-287-0739, staffed by attorneys Monday through Friday, bilingual, any legal question. Elder Justice Unit, a family law unit that represents people soup to nuts, including divorces, which are hard to get. Again, that's income qualified because we represent people who can afford legal assistance in that program, but in our family court legal program, there's no income qualification. So, and again, I just want to stress, even if you live in an $8 million house, you may not have access to even a fraction of that money. So I want to be clear that even if, I don't want to sound glib, that because you might live in what seems like a wealthy lifestyle from the outside, that you don't need assistance and you may not have access to funds and be able to qualify for our programs. We have an uncontested divorce, moderate means, a Be Prepared program. I just want to highlight a couple other things. Family Justice Center is still operational. You can walk in, it's in Westchester County, access to all services, and including free counseling, free support. And Office for Women also has services, and we're starting a high-risk task force across the county, realizing that these intimate partner crimes are the most volatile, both for our victims and family members, but our police officers walking into it. So thank you again for focusing on that, and thanks to my other panelists as well. I'm really looking forward to hearing about your services and your assistance. I'm sorry, Larry, I can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
Unmute, Larry. Unmute, Larry. Unmute. No, you're not, still muted. Larry, you're still muted. Unmute, Larry. Can you unmute, Larry?
How's that? Better?
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. It was so enlightening, and I got most of those phone numbers, but we'd love those in an email afterwards. Okay.
And I provided resources, so I know Ann plans to share them after the talk.
Great.
That's great. All right, we're moving on to Quentin Walcott of Connect NYC.
Larry, check your chat for me, Larry.
Say again?
Check your chat. Your chat down.
I don't know what he said. close something?
No, check your chat question.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay, very good. Thank you a lot, Quentin. Got it.
All right.
Go ahead.
No, you can talk about your programs, of course, Quentin, and how it relates to our population here and in the city, and your initiatives. You know, take it from there.
How do I have?
Yeah, sorry.
How much time?
You have, 5 and 6 minutes. So.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Quentin Walcott. Everyone, all my friends and family call me Q. My organization is Connect, and we're located in New York City, so the 5 boroughs of New York City. And although we kind of operate there, we do a lot of work nationally, and I do a lot of work internationally as well. What's really pretty unique about my organization and my work in New York City, at least, is that we are basically charged to look at what is domestic violence prevention look like in New York City. And prevention is a kind of a tricky word, because what it really is supposed to mean is that you prevent violence before it happens. So there's not that many places in New York City where violence is not happening. So a lot of that work looks like engaging, for us, it means engaging men and boys and youth around what healthy relationships are and what domestic violence really is, and how violence shows up in New York City. And then a lot of the work is really about interrupting cycles of violence, so there's no further incidents of violence that are happening. So that's the job for us to prevent. And as you all know, New York City is probably one of the most diverse cities in the world. So the approaches that we take in one borough may not be effective in another borough. Like when we first started, we started in central Brooklyn, Flatbush, East Flatbush, and Crown Heights. I know that many of you are familiar with those neighborhoods. And the reason why we started there was because that was where the highest incidents of domestic violence were happening. And this is about pretty much like 15, 16 years ago. Well, no, really, actually, Connect first started right after 9/11. So you can imagine the climate of New York City in that moment. So we were really working with, in that part of Brooklyn, really folks that were undocumented, people from all over the world that kind of relocated in New York City. So we were dealing with, West Indians, Caribbean, Africans, people from, different parts of Europe, and living right there in New York City, where the highest incidents of New York were happening in New York City. And unfortunately, it's still the place in New York City where the highest incidents are happening. So our approach was not to just only look at, these incidents and why is it happening, but it was also to look at what else is happening while this is happening. So not only was that part of Brooklyn highest incidence of domestic violence, there's also high incidence of sexual violence. There's high incidence of poor relationships with police, so a lot of police brutality. There was a lot of, organizing around community safety and what healthy relationships were. There were high incidence of HIV and AIDS. There's also high incidence of other really like health issues around asthma and things of that nature. So we had a holistic approach of dealing with domestic violence. And that same research that we did in Brooklyn, which kind of was composed of, doing focus groups and community assessments and organizing community, and also doing what we call street surveys, standing in front of train stations, laundromats, supermarkets, and the information that we really received from the people. And then we subsequently did the same research in South Bronx and Queens, making us become a citywide organization. But the information that we received was that folks who were struggling with domestic violence and understood that it was an issue in their community, we asked them questions about, where are you going for help? Why aren't you going for help? What are some of the issues coming up for you that are not really addressed through the already in place domestic violence systems, through the police and the courts? And two of the things that really came up that were significant for us and really informed how we developed our programs and trainings, because we're really a trainer organization. We work with over 200 community partners, develop strategies and interventions and projects to really address domestic violence and intimate partner violence in their own communities that are kind of informed by that community. And we're not coming in and telling them what to do. We're giving them the ability to kind of build their programs, provide technical assistance. But stepping back, the two things that really were prominent was that one, folks who were dealing with domestic violence, many of them did not want to go to the police because of the kind of environment where there was poor relationships with police. So there's a lot of racial tensions around getting help around domestic violence. So there was an intersection there that we had to look at. The other piece was that they instead of going to those systems, they wanted to go to their faith institutions. So a lot of the faith institutions I'm talking about, the church, the mosque, the synagogue, wherever the body of faith or practice for them, they wanted to go there instead of police or court systems. And many of these folks, again, were from different countries, were undocumented. So maybe they were leaving a country where they had a poor relationship with state violence and just didn't have the trust of faith. And then also, if you could just imagine for a moment, if I'm undocumented, I'm a victim survivor of domestic violence, what is the number, and I'm in the United States, what is the number one fear? So for many of them, it was the fear of deportation. So the other piece was that, but the problem was that churches did not really know how to handle domestic violence in their congregations, in their faith community. So that's where we came in. We helped to provide, give them, workable knowledge. They didn't have to be experts, but to kind of partner up with organizations like Connect or other local domestic violence, sexual violence organizations. And the second piece that was really prominent, that really kind of launched my work, was that folks felt that men need to be more involved in ending domestic violence. So a lot of that was, focus groups with men, with young people, people in the field that were not necessarily just working with victim survivors, but not really working with men. But all of those felt that men and boys needed to kind of step up more and look at what ways can we do to engage other men about looking at, our privilege that's related to domestic violence, how we're socialized to be men, and then kind of the choices and the thinking around that we have and attitudes that we have about women and girls in particular, and other men, because as you know, domestic violence happens in all types of relationships. So that was kind of our charge and our goal. So as a result of that, we developed, and most of our programs and services are for women and girls, but we felt that this holistic approach about engaging men and boys was crucially important around really interrupting the cycles of violence in New York City. So we developed programs, partnerships with over 200 community partners. And our training institute, which was the first thing I came on to develop, is really comprehensive. And we look at all the intersections of oppression and from particularly on the margin of race and gender, as we approach our work, because predominantly the folks that we work with are women of color, folks. And again, I think it was mentioned earlier, domestic violence does not discriminate, right? It can happen to anyone, and it's really nuanced reasons why people disclose or not, right? It may be how it impacts their abusive partner, their status, their shame, so many things connected to it. So I just wanted to kind of really iterate that in New York City, it may, the look or the face of domestic violence may look like Black and brown folks, Black and Latino folks primarily, or poor people, but it does impact everyone else. So our charge was to really look at how, with all of that in mind, how do we develop prevention programs and services? And my work in particular with men and boys started with looking at batterers intervention programs, which I'm sure many of you know about, and their effectiveness. And in New York City, the number looks like this. Approximately 700 calls a day for domestic violence happen in New York City, right? And that number is large in itself, but it's probably only about 28% of the cases of domestic violence that are actually happening. So if you do the math, just a small group of people are actually disclosing, getting the help that they need, and setting up services for survivors, of course. But then if you look at abusive partners where survivors may not be ready to leave or don't have the resources and support to leave or want to stay feeling that they can change, the relationship around violence in their relationships, But so to kind of do the math, so my work became very important about addressing working with men and boys who may not be caught up in systems, who may not be in a batters program. So our approach is really kind of wide to look at New York City communities and develop programs and projects around that. So I'll stop there for now, and then we'll talk a little bit more later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Quentin. May I call you Q?
Sir.
All right. And I was just about to cue you, so you were. I learned a lot. Learned a lot, and I'll be in touch. I want to turn the floor now over to Lieutenant Sandra DeRuza from the Village of Mamaroneck Police Department.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm going to talk about obviously domestic violence and touch on some things that both Q and that Susan spoke about. So we know that domestic violence is a pattern of coercive tactics, which can include all those things we talked about: physical, psychological, sexual, economic, and it's emotional, perpetrated by one person against another member of the same family or household, with that goal of establishing and maintaining power and control. It does know no boundaries. The Village of Mamaroneck Police Department is not immune to domestic violence. We have in 2019, the Village of Mamaroneck Police Department documented 168 domestic violence incidents. Thankfully, our police department is one of only a handful of departments that has dedicated domestic violence detectives to assist with these incidents. Society's view on domestic violence has also changed. It used to be considered a private matter or a family matter and something that was socially minimized. Now, people view these incidents of domestic violence as a crime, and they're more likely to report it and seek out assistance. In 1994, the New York State legislature passed the Family Protection and Domestic Violence Intervention Act, which contained provisions enacting a mandatory arrest statute. The law requires for police to go ahead and make arrests in cases where officers have reasonable cause to believe that specific crimes were committed against members of the same family or household, regardless of whether the victim wants the arrest made. Members of the same family or household refers to persons who are married, formally married, persons with a child in common, persons related by blood or marriage, or those who are or have been in an intimate relationship, whether or not the relationship is sexual in nature. The whole purpose of this mandatory arrest provision is to enhance safety for victims and their children, and to hold the offenders accountable for their abusive behavior, and also to remove the burden of arrest decisions from the victim. As police, we do understand that this is a difficult time for a victim. It may be the first time that he or she has to interact with the police or with the court system. Incidents of domestic violence affect children as well. More than 15 million children in the United States live in homes where domestic violence has happened at least once. These children are at greater risk for repeating the cycle as adults by entering into abusive relationships or becoming abusers themselves. Domestic incidents in this community are followed up with a call from one of our domestic violence detectives. They conduct further investigations and, if necessary, provide victims with information, referrals, and other resources. The domestic violence detectives have worked with the Community Resource Center, the Pace Women's Justice Center, the local schools, and the family court to provide assistance to those victims. Effective on October 17, 2019, a domestic violence victim can report domestic violence to any police jurisdiction in the state, regardless of where the incident took place, upon alleging it would be a hardship for them to report it where the incident occurred. A police agency must take the report and complete the appropriate paperwork. The Village of Mamaroneck Police Department is committed to investigating and reporting incidents of domestic violence and providing assistance to victims to end the cycle of abuse.
Well, that was terrific. Well, I learned a lot, Lieutenant. Thank you very much. And I'm sure there'll be other questions that are forthcoming.
Certainly.
So now we're going to go straight to our fourth panelist, final panelist, Edith Ramos from Westchester Community Opportunity Program. Edith.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. As Larry mentioned, I am a bilingual victim advocate at Westcott Victim Assistance Services. It's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I'm wearing purple. And one of the reasons I want to state that I'm wearing purple is to give honor and hope to victims who are experiencing domestic violence, to celebrate those who have survived domestic violence, and honor and remember those who lost their lives to domestic violence. That being said, I want to give a little information about our agency. Victim Assistance Services provide free and confidential resources to victims of crime in Westchester County. We assist our clients in connecting with many resources in the community and work with partners to provide support throughout, including assistance with legal resources, shelter, food, etc., as well as mental health services. We also have our 24-hour helpline, a confidential chat option that victims can go in the website if they would like to. And now starting, we have a text us option. I will send that information via email so you guys can have that information as well. And as we all mentioned, domestic violence is an intentional pattern of behavior used by a current or former intimate partner to establish and maintain power and control over their partner. Types of abuse can include physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, spiritual, cultural, technological, or economic as well. I would like to take a moment also to discuss a client that I had who suffered from domestic violence. I will name her Maria for confidentiality purposes. She came from Guatemala to be reunited with her husband in 2002. Once she came to the USA, her partner started drinking excessively, and every time he drank, he would hit her, calling her a bitch, accusing her of sleeping with men while she was crossing the border. He would also grab her head and put it outside the window, yelling at her and telling her that if she ever steps a foot outside the house, that the police will get her and that they will call immigration. And that's something very common in a lot of victims that we serve. They're very fearful of being deported. One day he just decided to push her down the stairs and kick her out of the house. So she slept in the streets in cold weather and in lobbies for many days. And because she had no family or resources, she had to return back to her abuser. In 2011, her oldest son came from Guatemala. And when her abuse occurred again, the son did not thought twice to call the police. And that was when he got arrested. And the White Plains Police provided her with victim assistance services information. And that's how she started receiving services by us. Until this day, she still receives mental health services from victim assistance services. She was also referred to my sister's place. That's another domestic violence and human trafficking agency that they also provide services to DV victims. At this moment, she still suffers from debilitating panic attacks that are so severe that she fears that she will not be able to breathe and is physically paralyzed during the duration of her panic attacks. She often finds herself unable to sleep since she cannot stop the list of worries racing through her mind and is profoundly fearful that she will bump with her abuser in White Plains again. And this happens to a lot of our victims, that they're afraid to make that call. They believe that we're an agency that are mandated to call the police, and we're not. We provide trauma-informed services and respect our clients' decisions. We want to empower each client that we serve. We do not push our clients to make that phone call or to make a police report if they're not ready to. And I will send all the information about our agency information.
Oh, yes, Edith, if you want to wind it up, you could. You have another minute if you'd like.
Okay.
because we're going to share some of that. We have a major resource list that we're going to either put in chat or, LMC will publish that, so we'll have that. But thank you. I think you exemplified the problem and how it's handled and the consequences and just how important this is right in our communities. Okay.
Yeah,
So I thank you for that.
I thank you.
We all do. And I just want to know, I think we're going to have time for questions. So questions that arose during the speaking, as well as other questions we have. So I'll turn it over to Ann.
Thank you. And thank you all. That was very informative. And as Larry mentioned, on the on the Summit website, there is a page of resources that includes the phone numbers for all these organizations and other ones as well in the area. So if you need help or you know someone who needs help, there's phone numbers and contact information there. So thank you all. If anyone has a question, any of the participants, there's a hand button at the bottom. Just raise your hand and we will call on you in the order that they come in. So I'm going to start with a question. So of course, we've been dealing with COVID all these months, and you guys put out, some unbelievable statistics of who this affects. Have you seen an uptick, especially since March, with quarantine and lives have obviously changed and uprooted? Have you all seen a great uptick in domestic violence incidents, reports since March or April?
If you want me to start quickly, yes, we've definitely. In March, when it first hit, the phones went quiet for about 2 or 3 weeks. And the calls we first got in that period were, interestingly, seniors who suddenly had younger family members, grandchildren, people moving in and using their resources, maybe taking their car, using their money. We actually helped more than 2 seniors seek family court protective orders because they had younger family members who were disregarding CDC guidelines, engaging in risky behavior, inviting their friends and other people in the home, leaving for periods of time, putting them at risk, as well as financial abuse, using their property, things like that. Beginning probably, and interestingly enough too, we, in working with some other departments at that same time period, they were noticing more theft of property services kind of thing, or car break-ins, at least in White Plains they were in that March to April period. But since about June, with the exception of calls regarding child abuse, which unfortunately are still sadly way down when we know this is happening, it isn't being reported. The calls regarding legal assistance and assistance for intimate partner violence have been skyrocketing. So even though it seems different to reach services that way, people thankfully have been finding a way to reach all of us. I'm sure everyone else will talk about that too. And we've had record numbers of people calling our helpline, our walk-in legal clinic, and they're doing it a little differently in that they're trying to find breaks to go outside or speak in code, or maybe it takes 4 or 5 calls to get an order of protection, in that they might be calling and then saying, I have to call back. And of course, we're waiting on the court to call our case as well. But it's definitely increasing dramatically, a little slow the first couple of weeks, but no longer. And it's definitely out there. I think people are just so anxious and worried about what to do next.
Yeah, if I could follow that, I think, Susan, thank you for saying that, because I think the thing that's really unique about this moment, because of COVID and the quarantine, is that the numbers are not really the real numbers, right? So if you have your abusive partner quarantined with you, it's very difficult to make that phone call and talk about the fact that I'm being abused or harmed in whatever way. So domestic violence is going up, sexual violence is going up, child abuse is going up. So it's been a very difficult time. I think the most difficult piece, and I know Edith could probably speak to this, is like, how do you safety plan in this moment, right? So I think that's been the struggle with domestic violence advocates and helplines and so forth. So one thing that we really did was to really ramp up our services for men as a way of taking the onus and responsibility off of victim survivors, to really provide spaces for them to deal with these issues around, who we are supposed to be in this moment is challenged as men, as fathers, as leaders of our families, because of, joblessness, fear of homelessness and just being around your children maybe for the first time, or even around your partner for the first time, for more than a couple of hours a day, right? Where that might have been the safety piece for a victim survivor, is that the abusive partner is not home all the time. So to have to struggle with all of that. So what we did was ramp up our men's roundtables and men's services and trainings to kind of give, men a place to vent and deal with all the challenges around their manhood in this moment, and those harmful pieces around manhood in this moment, and really kind of looking at their partners differently and having respect for, some of the men I've worked with for the first time have seen what a day in the life of their wife and their children are. So have gained respect, but like, how do you hold that and how do you behave in that way?
Yeah, thank you, Quentin. I would also like to add to that during like this COVID, it's also hard to find shelter space. Even before COVID, it was hard to find like that space for clients. And with COVID, it's even harder. So how do you provide that service, right? Like, how do you take them out of like imminent danger at that moment when there's like nowhere where they can go? So that has been like really hard, I think, during this COVID time. And I think this is one of the main reasons that Texas, that VAS has developed. It's a very good idea, and it's a very easier way for clients to communicate, seek for services.
And locally in Mamaroneck, have you found the same thing, Lieutenant? The same uptick in?
So we were fortunate that we were one of the jurisdictions that didn't see an increase in domestic violence during this time. It could be that maybe like Q was saying, that they were afraid to call because now they are confined in that space with their abusive partner. There was an uptake in crimes of larcenies and larcenies from vehicles. So that could be due to economic reasons. The one thing that we did see, and we do sometimes see issues with custody and visitation, that some people were using COVID as a reason why they weren't giving up their child to their partner because of those reasons. So that was something different that we did see.
Okay. And again, if anyone has a question, please just use the raise hand. If you suspect a neighbor, a friend, a family member is suffering from abuse, and obviously it's a very sensitive, very confidential, humiliating, and all the different emotions that go with it. What is the best thing for them to do? What would you suggest their first step should be to help their friend, neighbor, or loved one? I'm not sure yeah.
Well, if you are worried about a friend's safety, then I think one of the main things that you should do is stay in touch and make a plan with them. Also, be supportive and believe your friend, and do not make any judgment comments or push your friend to look for resources or call the police, or just stay there with her and be supportive. And whenever your friend will be ready to make that decision to leave their abusive relationship, then you'll guide them with the resources that you already gather for her or for him.
Yeah, I think that's all great information, and I think what Edith is also saying is like, find out what they need and what they want, in a safe time to do that. It may not be in the middle of the situation, it may be when the person is alone and feels safe enough. I think also some other strategies that we use just in terms of like, community, and like if it is a building that the person lives in, like the tenant committee could develop, put that on their agenda, like, addressing domestic violence, and not doing it in a way that it targets the survivor, victim survivor, but doing it in a way, in a general way. Like this is, for domestic violence awareness month, October is one way that people do that. I struggle with that because domestic violence happens every few seconds. So it makes it just this October thing, but to make it, a natural thread in all of the conversations that you have about everything and anything, so outside of the October, talk about it, put up a poster in your lobby, provide numbers and services that if you know anyone, so not targeting someone because the abusive partner will say, well, who'd you tell? So you got to be really creative and imaginative to kind of help people in generally. And if you work in a faith institution, like, and to be honest with you, churches did not handle HIV well because of the fear of homophobia. Churches now are dealing with it because it's become a safer and there's more information about it. Churches deal with substance abuse and alcohol abuse added to all of those other topics that you're talking about. So you're not isolating it and targeting anyone. Make it one of those social justice or health issues that you're dealing with, like everything else. So that, and if you provide the services and you change the culture of disclosure, people are more likely to get the help that they need. And even the abusive partner, right? Sometimes you want to approach that person because that might be the safest thing to do now to prevent that person from being abusive in a relationship. And there's different approaches that we can take. And I can provide some resources of what we usually do when we're trying to help people develop safety plans, like Edith mentioned, and supporting them. And doing so in a way that you're not reproducing the abuse that they're trying to get away from, right? Because we know better and she's not doing what we want her to do on our schedule. We replicate this idea of power and control. So we don't want to approach it that way either. We want to be available when they're ready.
I think that's all great. I would just add in, echoing the same thoughts. The key is no judgment, right? We don't know what their lives are really like. And, certainly domestic violence is one of those crimes people, as everybody's talked about, don't come out and say, hey, want to hear what happened to me this morning? And let me talk about the sexual abuse and how I got hit and how I can't see my kids and how was your morning? So the key is to make sure that knowledge is power, however we can support, because when you think about the men and women, the individuals who are living through this, well, they're kind of superheroes, right? Because if my day is stressful and yet I've got a partner who helps me with my kids and helps us financially as well as we both work and try to have the same shared goal. And I'm still finding this pandemic stressful and disrupting and, worry filled for my elderly relatives. I can imagine if I'm housing with my abuser and he's lost his job and we're relying on my income and I've got little kids who are homeschooling. The one thing I would say is if you can help give people time to examine their options. And much like Quentin was saying about the church and faith-based community, OCA, Office for Women in our office we've been working together, and luckily the Office for Court Administration in Westchester has seen the need to increase access to services right now. So there are several pilot programs in churches in Westchester, one in Peekskill, a few in Mount Vernon. I can share that information afterwards to post on the site, with the idea that, as Quentin was saying, faith-based communities are a great place that people seek solace and support and knowledge, and they're putting computers there, because a lot of people, as we have the luxury of talking on Zoom, for a lot of our community members in Westchester County, Wi-Fi might be an issue, and they may not have, not just Westchester City too, Putnam, they may not have the same access to getting online, to speaking confidentially, to not being monitored by their abuser, even if they have a cell phone or laptop. So these new community programs are putting computers in churches where, you can tell your partner, I'm going to go down to church. And maybe you're going to go down to church and get in a private room and get on the internet and start searching, counseling programs, batterers programs, civil legal assistance. The great thing, as expensive and as challenging it can be to be a New Yorker, there are a lot of great resources that still exist right now. We just have to make sure that our neighbors and our friends are aware of them and that the help is there. And when they're ready to take those steps, that we support them.
And I know there was a question for me in the chat about where can abusive partners go. You can reach out to me. I have some resources. And then, also national helplines, and I know the thinking is that they're just really about, women and women and children, but you could call a helpline and they can locate local batters programs or people to talk to as well. If you're struggling with the idea of being abusive in your relationship, or you have been abusive, there's programs that are available that work kind of within the systems and outside of systems as well.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question? It's 8:56.
Quentin, can you tell us more about what you're doing as an intervention with boys? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so a lot of what that looks like is working with with boys in schools, doing single gender groups, and when we work with boys, we're also working with girls as well. So it's it might be separately and then together at one point, but we're working in schools wherever boys are. Like one creative project we had in the past was like there's a lot of basketball leagues, summer leagues, and things like that where youth play. We talk to the young people before they bounce any ball. That we have to talk about what healthy relationships look like, what it means to be a man, and not in the sense of shoring up masculinity in that way, but like really breaking down what it means to be a man, healthy attitudes towards women and girls and other boys and girls. You know what I mean? So it's all part of power and control, just in the terms of it could be one-on-one in terms of domestic violence, or one-on-one in a workplace, or a group of people on one. So, but at the core of it is power and control. It's kind of looking at how that shows up in people's lives and what are their examples and notions of manhood, fatherhood, and what it means to be in a relationship. And so where they're getting their ideas about, what manhood is, and then unpacking those really negative aspects of that are harmful to someone else. My struggle always is, it's great to support men, but not at the cost of a woman, or someone who may not fit in, or another man who does not fit into this quote unquote machismo male box in terms of looking at what a man is typically supposed to be. That we need to kind of challenge that, and being more vulnerable and talking about emotions and vulnerability as a strength, so because we're kind of pegged to just kind of look at anger and outrage, but there's so many different emotions and feelings in between anger and being outraged and acting out in your relationship.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Do you want one more question? It's just about 9. Do you want, John had one more question. We know that abuse is not a class-based problem, but are there different patterns in the way either victims or victimizers turn to or resist assistance?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, I'm sorry to go first, but like that is the center of my work, our work, particularly in like cities like New York City, where it's so diverse. Again, domestic violence doesn't discriminate. The response to domestic violence is the issue, right? Depending on where you live, historical relationships with services and police, and not just police and courts, but child welfare, and other health issues that are connected to it. And just right in this moment, it's COVID, it's about health disparities, it's about systemic forms of racism, and the issue of intimate partner violence in itself is just being exacerbated. So you're dealing with all of these intersecting issues and oppressions, and they're also laid on top of each other. So it makes it very difficult in terms of response. And if we're dealing with COVID and you can't get out and people can't get in, that makes it even more difficult. So we have to be really strategic around how we deal with that. But I think that is the number one thing. How do people respond to domestic violence based on your race, class, gender, orientation, et cetera, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Good. And there was a question also about what could be done to protect victims without legal status from being reported to ICE if they come forward? Is there any protection for that?
Well, yes, I'm sorry to interrupt. Well, yeah, actually, and I know the lieutenant might respond to this as well. There's actually certain visas, U visas, and visas that people who have concerns regarding immigration status and may be an intimate partner violence victim, male or female, can seek particular protections. We strongly urge anybody to reach out and have a conversation if they're considering, if they have the ability to have a discussion at a time that's safe with them about what assistance would look like and how it could impact their family and their life, because we want to provide a net of services. Because you're right, if you've got an immigration concern, you're not necessarily thinking, as Quentin mentioned as well, and Edith too, that you're going to just pick up the phone and call the police. Because if you've been watching the news, and certainly I know we do outreach at food pantries because we're trying to meet people in places where they're at and show a friendly face and give them a chance to access information in a place where they might not be monitored. And people are very wary, understandably, of thinking any sort of intervention may trigger other effects in their life that they're not looking for. But there are legal resources in our communities for assistance with regard to immigration matters. There are steps they can take as they report. There are special petitions they can apply for. And the reality is, thankfully, like we have great police agencies in Westchester County. I know the lieutenant can talk about it, that are really interested in helping and protecting people. And if people have those concerns, they're legitimate concerns, but that's why I'd urge them to call one of our agencies, call the helpline, get assistance first, talk about their options and decide what's best for their family, but please don't live in a way that's unsafe for you or your children or your extended family because you're thinking you're in a box, which is what a lot of the abusers do, is that they use immigration status as a way to coerce and control somebody to stay in that relationship, to say, you know, I'm sponsoring you, or you're never going to get to see your kids, or I'll send you back to wherever you came from if you call the police, or you try to separate from me, or you try to seek a divorce.
Susan, just to add on, can you tell us the law that might have expired, but now it's continuing to, so that victims, you know, can not fear ICE appearing at their front doorstep? There's actually a law, you know, I'm not going to make us lawyers here, but isn't there a specific legal
well, you know, in terms of, right. And of course, in terms of New York, we have our own laws about, and our own edicts from our governor about sort of keeping ICE out of the courthouses and keeping ICE away from places where people might seek intervention. Although understandably, our victims, much like the rest of us, consume news and they hear reports across the country that some areas are not, seem to be almost working in partnership, at least if you believe the news, with ICE at times in a way that would make them fearful about interventions. But in terms of New York State, that's why we're urging people to call and talk to one of us or seek assistance first, so you know how you can safely access this, and that this shouldn't be this understandably is a concern for you, but it's a concern we want to address, because that's going to be something that'll keep you in an abusive relationship. If you feel that your freedom is hindered by the fact that you don't have status in the US and therefore you can't seek assistance. I mean, there's nothing, and the lieutenant can address this. You have a right without status being undocumented to call the police, to go to an emergency room and seek assistance, to go to family court and petition in family court and seek a non-criminal intervention. Those are all your abilities. And understandably, it's our job to inform and educate people so they know what their rights are, and also at the same time build that net of referring them to free immigration services in our county and city, so they can start to get the real help they need to make their lives more stable and hopefully provide safety as they move forward.
Thank you.
I want to thank you. I want to thank the wonderful people this morning. Thank Larry and Ann, who so ably guided us through this as well. Oh, and also I want to thank LMC once again for making all this possible. I also want to let you know that next month, that's November 10th, our next meeting will be dealing with eviction and its impact on our community. I hope we can see you then, and I want to thank you for attending this morning. Thank you and goodbye, and have a good week, everybody.